Hi everyone, and welcome to this short video on anxiety and the voice. Now we all know if we're singing professionally or speaking publicly that anxiety can affect the voice. But what we're also going to look at in this video is how the voice can actually be used to regulate our anxiety and stress systems. Now, the voice is very expressive of our true identity. When I'm talking to somebody in a session, I'm really more interested in the quality, the texture, the amount of constriction, the bandwidth changes in the voice, rather than the actual words, because there's a lot more subtext that is being expressed through the voice. It is a highly emotive expression of our true identity. And when we talk about anxiety, yes, we can have performance anxiety going on a stage, but often for performers, being on stage and being in the public eye is where they're more comfortable, and the stress is often related to other aspects of their life. Therefore, being anxious about something unrelated to a performance can also affect the performance, and often we need to get to that rather than just thinking it's totally to do with the fact that you're stepping on the stage to vocalize. Now, I've done a whole other video on the biology of stress and anxiety, so I'm not going to go into detail here. You can check that one out. So just a little brief overview of the architecture of the nervous system and how it mediates the stress response. Now, when we go into an anxiety response, it's mediated by the autonomic nervous system. This is the part of our nervous system that deals with all the subconscious or involuntary actions in the body. The heartbeat, breathing, digestion. These things don't need our conscious overruling in order to activate. These are driven by this subconscious system. The sympathetic nervous system is the system that mediates the fight or flight response, which is our stress or anxiety response. The parasympathetic nervous system mediates the rest and digest response. And this really should be our default state. It's where all the body's maintenance, growth and repair happens. It's the restorative state. So really we want that to be our resting normal state, and we only use the sympathetic branch for when we have a threat to deal with. Now, the parasympathetic state is mediated in a very large way through the body by the vagus nerve. Many of you may have heard of this nerve, but essentially it runs to all the organs of the body and delivers the parasympathetic signal. So it basically tells all the organs of the body, we're safe, no threat in the environment, you can go about normal restoration and repair work. We've got two branches of this vagus nerve, a right one and a left one, that exit the brain and come down the neck, and then they branch off to all parts of the body. That prefix, VAG, is similar to vagabond. It means wandering, the wandering nerve. Now, what's key for us to understand as vocalists is that this nerve also provides the motor, which is the movement signal for muscles, to the muscles of the palate, which are the roof of the mouth muscles, the pharynx, which is the throat. We can constrict that pharynx as we swallow. We can dilate it, which is often what we're aiming for as vocalists. And it also has a branch that comes off the main vagus nerve on the left side and becomes what's called the recurrent laryngeal nerve. And this one, the clue's in the title, it goes and it serves the muscles of the larynx, the intrinsic vocal muscles. So the vagus nerve is also very prominent in coordinating the swallowing mechanism. And it can also mediate the tickly or nervous cough reflex that we often have when we're nervous. If I'm talking to someone and they're always sort of needing to clear that throat, my first little flag goes up that, yeah, maybe there's something going on with the vagus nerve there. We're kind of fritzing in and out of that vagal dominant state. So again, this shows how the nerves that serve the emotional response are also involved in the muscle responses that operate the vocal mechanism. We're going to talk briefly here about something called polyvagal theory. This is a theory derived by Dr. Stephen Porges. I highly recommend checking out his work. And he describes how the vagus nerve has other branches that help us to understand the difference between being in our safe, normal, what we would call parasympathetic dominant state, the anxiety state, but also the freeze state, because anxiety doesn't always manifest as panic and shortness of breath and all those kind of symptoms. Sometimes our anxiety drops us into a freeze state, a state of immobilization. And when we understand the architecture of the vagus nerve in a little more depth, we can see how we move between these different states, and we can also develop tools to help us get ourselves out of those states if they're not helpful to us at that time. So what polyvagal theory describes is a state of social engagement. This is the completely safe, no threat detected in your environment state, and it's mediated by a branch of the vagus nerve called the ventral vagus. Ventral just means towards the chest side of the body, towards the front of the body. And in this state, we're able to socially engage. There's a whole other aspect to the vagus nerve that helps mediate all our facial expressions and helps us read facial expressions in others. And when we're looking at other people and engaging with them, we're dictating whether we feel safe or not with them. That's all in more detail, so maybe I'll do a separate video on that. But when we feel safe with someone, we can be socially engaged. We can be in the present, in the I am. We feel safe, we feel grounded, and in this state we have the capacity to feel joy, to be curious, to be present and mindful, and also to experience compassion. However, if we detect a threat in our environment, that may be something from outside us, or it may be our own mind monkeys, because our stress response can be responding just to our own inner talk. If we feel unsafe, we're going to first of all shift into the red zone of that sympathetic fight or flight response. And this is a state of mobilization. I need to take action in this state. So if I'm unsafe, if I feel anxious, I can move my body, and again, check out the anxiety video to see all the things that switch on in our bodies when we're in this state. But this is where anger lives, irritation, rage, frustration, because those are all defense responses. If you don't feel safe, you need to defend yourself. However, this is a very biologically expensive place to live. It takes a lot of our energy to run this system. If you are stuck in this anxiety state and your issue is not resolving, the threat is not going away, particularly if it's in your own head, then the body will start to think, you know what, we're running out of gas in this state. It's not really economical for us to stay here, and it can start to be detrimental to many of the body's systems. So what it can then do is shift you into what's called the dorsal vagus state. Dorsal means towards the back of the body. If you think of the dorsal fins on a shark, they're on its back. So this branch of the vagus nerve mediates the freeze response. And this is where we go into shutdown. We dissociate. And this is where depression lives. We can see it's biologically very different to that anxiety state. So this is where we can feel overwhelmed by things. We just want to crawl under the duvet and shut it all out. It's where shame lives. And often we're numb in this state versus the sympathetic state where we're hypersensitive and we feel and hear everything. In the freeze state, we're really dissociated from our senses in our body. Now, what's key to note is this system is hierarchical. If we're in that socially engaged state, a threat comes into the environment, we mount a sympathetic response. If that's not working for us, we can drop into the freeze state. But to get back from the freeze state to the socially engaged state, we actually have to come back through that red zone. We have to get back into mobilization from that immobilized state. If you're in I can't, you've got to get yourself back into I can before you can come back to the socially engaged state. Now, this is useful to know because it helps us develop strategies for managing these different states, recognizing when we're in one or the other, and then using the appropriate tools to manage it because they're very different. If you're in that sympathetic state, the agitated, anxious state, you're in a hypersensitized state. If people are around you, if anybody reaches out and touches you, you're going to be really kind of agitated by that. You don't need people in your face when you're in this state. When you're experiencing this, you're much better off to remove yourself from stimulation, isolate yourself, and then use some tools to reorganize and regulate that stress system without any interference around you. However, if you're in that freeze state, that's the opposite of what you want to do. You're already dissociated. You've already cut yourself off. So if you go into an isolated place, then you're going to reinforce the freeze state. So say, for instance, you're doing a show and you're with your fellow cast members and you all work together every day. You can use each other to help balance these states. Say to people, look, if you see me really kind of agitated and edgy, can you please just give me some space? Don't come up and go, hey, hi, how you doing? And kind of try and interact with me. Just let me chill. I'll sort myself out and then I'll come back. However, if you see me kind of checked out, can you come and bring me out of it? What we need in that freeze state is connection, eyes. Make eye contact with somebody. Have somebody reach out and go, come on, bring yourself back into mobilization. Let's go. Let's bring you into that active state. And that will help bring you back through that mobilized state so that you can come back into the socially engaged state. So two very different responses there. But how does the voice play into this? Sound frequencies. So this vagus nerve, which is I'm doing no justice to here because I'm just showing you very small aspects of what this incredible nerve helps mediate in the body, but it's also part of how we react to different sound frequencies. So if you think of somebody who's in a hyper anxious state, who's under threat, so if someone's under attack somewhere, they're going to scream and it's going to be in that high, shrill bandwidth. If you hear that, even if you can't see the person, your body's going to mount a stress response. It drives that sympathetic response. So those high frequency, shrill sounds will kick us into a sympathetic response. If we take a look at that freeze end of our spectrum, it's the low tones that will drop us into the freeze response. That's why the Jaws theme works so well. When you hear that Jaws theme, doo-dum, doo-dum, you don't go into panic, you freeze. Huh. It drops you right down into the abdomen and you get that dropped sinking feeling and you stop. That's the freeze response. So low tones, low bandwidth sounds will mediate us into that tendency. So if you think of your moody adolescent who's kind of in that duvet day kind of mode, doesn't want to go anywhere, you can't get them to do anything, and they're listening to death metal, they're reinforcing themselves into that low frequency freeze state. However, the socially engaged state responds to mid-range tones, so middle part of the musical scale, but also melodic and prosodic sound. That's that lilting, rising and falling sound. It's the lullaby. We don't sing lullabies up here, and we don't sing lullabies down there. We sing lullabies in that mid-range, floaty, rise and fall bandwidth, and that regulates the nervous system into social engagement. So I encourage anyone that's experiencing either anxiety or depression to either create themselves a playlist that gives them mid-range melodic prosodic sounds, that by listening to that you can pull yourself into the socially engaged state, or as a vocalist you can sing yourself there. So have a little repertoire of songs that bring you into that mid-range melodic prosodic bandwidth, and you can sing your nervous system back into regulation. A great way to do this is humming. How many people do you see just humming? What are they doing? People say, oh, it's just mindless. I don't even know I'm doing it. Actually, what they're doing is regulating their nervous system. The thing with humming is it creates a vibrational frequency that actually really kind of runs through all the soft tissues of the body, and it helps to regulate that nervous system. So by using your voice, you can regulate your own emotional state, but you can also regulate the state of others. And you see how now that when you're in performance, you are actually helping to regulate the audience's nervous system. If you're anxious and you're singing with a little bit of constriction, they're going to hear that in your frequency and they're going to feel a little bit on edge. They're not going to relax into your performance in the same way you would if you were dilated in the pharynx and open, because that's a vagus dominant state. It relaxes you and it relaxes those who are listening to you. This is highly complex stuff, and that was just a little glimpse, but I think it's key for us to know that we have inside us the tool we need to regulate our own nervous system and those around us.